Mr. Speaker.
Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this from the crew who tried to convince us that bigger class sizes was going to be better for educational outcome. Mr. Speaker, that just about says it all, because this is the same bureaucratic babble and nonsense that they tried to foist on New Zealand parents when they said having more children in a class and fewer teachers in those classrooms would be better for educational quality. Well, Mr. Speaker, they were trying to pull the wool over parents' eyes then, and they're trying to do the same now with their... Well, actually, they're not even trying to argue. Let's be honest about it. The National Party can't even sustain more than 1 minute's worth of argument for charter schools. They are so embarrassed. They are so embarrassed by this feeble attempt. Well, then I challenge the next National MP who gets on their feet to talk for 10 minutes and actually argue for charter schools, not do what Cam Calder did. He's the chair of the Select Committee. He couldn't even utter the words charter school when he gave his contribution. He wanted to talk about search and surveillance. He wouldn't even address the issue, the main issue in this amendment bill, and that is that they are borrowing a failed system from the United States, like the National Party does all the time with all of their policies. They cannot come up with New Zealand-grown, Kiwi-based success stories, and so they look to wreck our education system by borrowing from a failed system in the United States. And isn't that the National Party all over? And isn't that also John Banks all over as well? Because the shameful thing about this piece of legislation is that the government is putting politics in front of our children. They are putting politics before our children and the quality of the education system, because they are trading in our world-class public education system. They're trading that in for a failed system that we do know. I'm going to disagree a little with Tracy Martin on this, actually, from New Zealand First, because she said there is no evidence around charter schools. Well, there is. The evidence is they fail. The evidence is they fail. In every other country where they have been implemented, they fail. So we have got the evidence. We know that they do not work. What is it that the government doesn't get about their so-called 20% tale of underachievement that they keep going on about? 20%, they say, of our children don't achieve. John Banks agrees. He has to agree. That's the line they've been trotting out for about 5 years now. 20%. Well, look, there's another 20% figure I want to remind that government about. 20% of our children in Aotearoa live in poverty. 20% of children in the land of milk and honey live in poverty. What do they not get about the correlation between those two statistics? That 20% of our children live in poverty and 20% of our children, they say, are failing. What do they not get? Why do they not join the dots? Join the dots, Mr. Banks, because you and that party over there will do nothing about addressing poverty. They are doing nothing. In fact, they want to pretend it doesn't exist. That's the way that party wants to address poverty. They want to pretend it doesn't exist. And instead of dealing with the root causes, and instead of addressing issues that New Zealand families are crying out for in terms of support with their children, what do instead? They come up with a solution that no one has asked for. They come up with a solution over a cosy cup of tea, well, actually a corrupt cup of tea, actually, as we learnt afterwards, that's the solution they come up with: charter schools. No one asked for charter schools. Well, actually, I may be wrong there, Mr. Speaker. I apologise if I'm wrong, because I think John Banks asked for charter schools. This was the dirty deal that was stitched up between ACT and National so that National could get back into power. They did a dirty deal over Epsom, and they did a dirty deal over the teacups with charter schools as well. And that is today, sadly, what our children are being exposed to. That's what future generations are going to be exposed to because of that dirty deal over a dirty cup of tea and the Epsom electorate. But, Mr Speaker, John Banks says diddums. That's a really mature contribution to the debate. That's about the level of it, and in terms of maturity, this is the man, New Zealand. This is the man who is wrecking your New Zealand, your education system, and his response is diddums. That's as good as it gets. I want everyone in New Zealand to understand who the mastermind is behind charter schools. The best defence he can come up with is diddums. Well, that about says it all. Mr Speaker, on the Select Committee, we actually had a briefing from a woman from New Orleans. Karen Harper-Royal was her name. And, well, Mr Banks wants to know how bad it was. I think he needs to listen up, because it was pretty prophetic what she told us, not pathetic, prophetic. It was a prophecy. She warned us that in New Orleans what had happened was that the government there used the opportunity of a natural disaster to close down a number of state-funded schools. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Because those state-funded schools were replaced by these failing charter schools. And she came to warn us that she believed that exactly the same thing would happen in Christchurch. Natural disaster, government comes along, closes down state schools, and then opens up privatised charter schools without any accountability to the public on those same sites. And what did we hear today from the Minister? Well, I think the Minister pretty much confirmed that that is exactly what this government has planned, and the members opposite know it. Listen to it. You can hear a pin drop. They know it. They know that their government has gone about closing down state-funded schools in order to slip taxpayer money across to charter schools run by their mates without any accountability. And while I'm on that issue, John Banks tried to pretend, and so did the last speaker, Colin King, that somehow these were going to be community-run facilities, run by the community for the community. Well, they're not required to have a board of trustees, not like state-run schools, and they are not required to actually give any information to the public about how the public's own money is being used in running these schools. Now, there is only one reason why the government would want to hide that information. Oh, I can think of two, actually. One is they do not want the public to know how their money is being misused. And secondly, they do not want the public to discover how those charter schools are failing. They make a lot of the contracts that are going to be made between the Crown and these charter school operators, whoever they may be, and they could be anybody, quite frankly, because there are no rules, there are no regulations, there are no standards when it comes to who can run a charter school. Isn't that right, Mr Banks? No standards at all for who can run a charter school. There are no standards. And so they're dropping the standards, no standards there. They won't let anyone understand what is going on because they have deliberately kept them out of the purvey of the Official Information Act, and they expect us to believe that this is about improving the education system. Well, Mr Speaker, if it was an ounce about improving the education system, they would be proud of it, they wouldn't be hiding it. While I'm on the subject of who would be proud and not hiding, can I say shame on the Māori Party? Shame on the Māori Party for not being involved in this debate and for actually putting the votes to something they're not even prepared to come and speak to in the House, because they haven't made a contribution to this debate. They are instrumental in forcing this upon our wonderful education system, and yet where are they when the rubber hits the road? Where are they to stand up and be counted on why they are putting their votes beside this school? Well, I can tell that member what we did. We funded Te Kotahitanga. We didn't cut the funding like his government is doing. He does not care care at all for Māori achievement. If he can be a member of a government who will cut the funding to one of the most successful programs for Māori students in Te Kotahitanga. So that member need not take that attitude, because if he really meant what he said, he wouldn't be doing that.
Mike Sabin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm astounded at what I've